All oppressors' greatest power over us is their ability to create false narratives that serve their hidden nefarious agendas, impose them upon us, and then have our thoughts and behaviors aligned with those false narratives as if they're true. Case, point, and proof. Through the oppressors' propaganda campaigns, they've manipulated millions of us to perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies and to revere them in spite of a brutally horrific history of the contrary. Millions of our people are currently functioning based upon that fraudulent propaganda campaign instead of the true reality. It's how they profoundly divided us and shifted our collective aggressions away from them and redirected it towards ourselves. It's the true reason why many of us are now speaking negatively about our own group and favorably about our oppressors, in spite of a brutal history to the contrary. Those of us who doubt what I've just disclosed does so because they don't know the true underlying relationship that presently exists between us and the white dominant society. Although the oppressors now publicly professes equality for all, they're secretly unrelentingly committed towards the preservation of their nation's white social dominance and white social capital over the black population. There's also an immense concern of massive unified black retribution that exists amongst the white ruling elites, given the white society's long history of brutal racism, discrimination, and exploitation of the black population. This unrelenting commitment towards maintaining white social dominance over the black population and immense concern of massive unified black retribution resulted in systems being put in place to meet the objective of maintaining white social dominance over the black population, and that prevents unified black retribution against the white society. To not have done so would have been against the interests of the white society. Therefore, presently, there are white government agents that specializes in psychiatry and propaganda that works unrelentingly behind the scenes, shaping the public perceptions in ways that aids in maintaining white social dominance over blacks, and that manipulates the collective minds of the black masses in ways that prevents us from engaging in acts of massive unified retribution against the white society. Case, point, and proof. Have you ever noticed that all narratives that we receive about Caucasians are consistently positive, while to the contrary, all narratives that we receive about black people are consistently negative? In fact, you could live your entire life and never once hear a negative narrative stated about the white society, while also never once hearing a positive narrative stated about the black population. Have you ever also noticed that all study results that we receive from white sources favors themselves over blacks? To have study results so one-sidedly favoring one racial group over another, as we're experiencing favoring whites over blacks, is absolutely ridiculous. The entire scenario is cartoonishly unrealistic. Here's what's actually happening. All societies function based upon the narratives that are repeatedly fed into the society. Those narratives repetitively exalting whites while perpetually marginalizing blacks are actually deliberately designed to create and sustain false assumptions within the society that aids in maintaining white social dominance and white social capital over the black population. Those false narratives constantly placing whites above blacks are also designed to instill the myth of white racial superiority and black racial inferiority into our subconscious minds, which makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. I've just laid out the propaganda campaigns that's used for maintaining white social dominance over the black population. Now, I will tell you of the many propaganda campaigns that are used to prevent the black masses from engaging in massive unified black retribution against the white society. Because it was determined that black unity was the core factor for the unprecedented unified black protests demonstrated during the 1960s, white oppressive forces started deploying divisive propaganda campaigns against us. As a means of preventing black people from unifying against the white oppressive society, white propagandists have spread lots of fraudulent propaganda into our communities. They literally have us drowning in disinformation. We now have millions that are insisting that we're the true Jews found within a Bible written by our most ungodliest enemies, and that was brutally beaten into submission within the blood-soaked minds of our enslaved ancestors. No premise can be more absurd, but it's believed by millions. That propaganda campaign makes us passive, and it makes us complacently wait for Jesus to come rescue us rather than rescuing ourselves. We also now have millions that are insisting that we African Americans are not from Africa, but are instead the true indigenous Americans. Although millions of us have taken DNA analysis that have scientifically confirmed our African identity. The narrative that we're not from Africa is actually fraudulent propaganda created by white propagandists. That false propaganda campaign creates division between those of us that knows we're from Africa and those that have been misled to believe that we're the true indigenous Americans. It also creates conflict between the true indigenous Americans and we African Americans. When the indigenous Americans and the African Americans are kept divided, this makes the U.S. system of white supremacy stronger. The oppressors are always made stronger when the two oppressed groups are divided. The narrative that we are the true indigenous Americans instead of Africans is also designed to divide us from Native Africans. When we Africans are divided globally, we lose our global numerical advantage and we're stripped of all hopes of ever defeating global white supremacy. The narrative that we're not from Africa is also designed to separate us from our unified African heritage. Without having a based identity to connect to our vast cultural wealth, over time we become further fragmented and we become weaker as a people. We can then be made into anything the oppressors wants us to be. White propagandists also created the ridiculous false narrative that we made the N-word ours and that using it ridiculously empowers us. That's the most ridiculous one ever. Many black people then accepted that false narrative as being true and then started self-identifying by the N-word. However, both of those narratives are the opposite of the truth. They do not benefit us, so we didn't make it ours. It was through negative media social engineering that white social scientists and white propagandists manipulated us to self-identify ourselves to the N-word. They did this beginning with the black exploitation films. And the reason why they did this to us is because to subjugate and control a large targeted population, the first step is to neutralize the alpha males, aka those possessing warrior spirits. These are the males that are psychologically wired to protect our women and to defend our communities. White social scientists neutralize the black alpha males by socially engineering millions to self-identify ourselves by the N-word. This is because words, when repeated often enough, has power over the subconscious mind. When we repeatedly call ourselves by the N-word, This psychologically conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false, inherent, inferior, subordinate identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over black people. And when we call each other by the N word, this also causes us to dehumanize each other. This makes it much more easier to mistreat and even kill each other. They've placed an elaborate spell upon our subconscious mind by creating the false narrative that we made the N-word ours and that using it now ridiculously empowers us. It's time to wake up to our reality. White propagandists also have millions of us believing that we're our own worst enemies, as I started in the beginning, and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. This false propaganda campaign is what creates black self-hatred, division, and what shifted our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. The problem has never been Willie Lynch. Willie Lynch never existed. They also conditioned millions of us to exclude the white society within all of our analysis regarding our plight and condition, and to instead always blame ourselves. This is the collective state we're now in. White social scientists determined a long time ago, as long as we're kept within this collective state, we can then be ruled over forever. It's the absolute truth of our plight and condition. The white oppressor's greatest power over black people is their ability to create false narratives that keeps us thinking and behaving and functioning in ways that are against our own self-interest and that instead serves the interests of the white society. This is the truth of our plight and condition. They've transformed this power into their greatest weapon against black people. Brothers and sisters, it's time to wake up to our reality. It's time to start critically thinking. One love and peace.